This week on The Wheelhouse. Federal worker layoffs. A push to reduce the federal workforce and push back from those affected. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. The Department of Government Efficiency, a.k.a. DOGE, has had a busy few weeks as Elon Musk and team attempt to decrease the size and spending of the federal government. Layoffs of federal workers have already begun, leaving many across the state, and really the country, feeling confused and worried. And the effort to protect federal workers is playing out locally. To tell me more about this, I'm joined by Eddie Martinez. There he is, breaking news and general assignment reporter for Connecticut Public. Eddie, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Hi, Frankie. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, so good to have you on. Folks want to join the conversation, they can give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Eddie, tens of thousands of U.S. federal employees could lose their jobs as the Trump administration moves to, I would say, dramatically reduce the size of the federal workforce. Are we seeing any backlash to the potential cuts play out locally?
Yeah, there has been a lot of concern here in Connecticut over a potential minimizing of the federal workforce. Worker union organizers, workers, and supporters held a rally last week at a VA hospital in West Haven, which it covered tail end of, where they expressed anger and confusion over potential firings or minimizing of the workforce.
We're going to play some clips later. We'll hear from Renee Luno-Shekfi, who's one of the people that you talked to. But what are they basically saying when you're at these rallies? What are you hearing? Why are they organizing, at least?
It's pretty simple. They want to keep their jobs. They want to keep their jobs, and they don't understand the reasoning why behind these cuts. They well, of course, look broadly if there was waste involved, and broadly they're behind that, but they don't understand the rationale for removing that many workers.
Eddie, we got a statement to Connecticut Public Radio from Veterans Affairs Press Secretary Pete Kasperowitz. Push back against criticism federal agencies are getting for letting workers go, calling it disinformation. He says the VA is committed to providing health care and benefits recipients of care have earned, along with improving the department overall. He also said the intention is to strengthen the department, including redirecting billions of dollars from non-mission critical efforts to health care benefits and services that directly support VA beneficiaries. Any response to what he shared, or at least what you all are writing in your news stories after you include something like that in there?
Well, that's the rationale. But from what I've heard from advocates, is that and the cuts this massive would most likely have an impact on medical care provided to veterans. The VA, as it is right now, has already been described as being understaffed for at least a decade, according to a news report from USA Today. So further cuts would probably worsen the situation.
In a Zoom with the media last week, Congressman Joe Courtney estimated that 6,000 veterans will be impacted directly, Eddie. Layoffs could also have a trickle-down effect, impacting more than just the workers who are laid off. Can you help us get into the larger ramifications of this action?
Yeah. If I could start off by just saying that looking at from the ground level of what the larger impact could be. I was told by an organizer as well as a Shekfi that they're already doing a lot more with less because of the fact that they're short-staffed, and the impacts of the cuts could impact quality of care, wait times, and according to the public comments by the former VA inspector before he was let go last month, there was already a shortage of senior staff positions at the VA before the cuts were announced.
Federal government employees rallied outside of the West Haven Veteran Affairs Medical Center last week, and of course, our man Eddie Martinez was there. The West Haven VA serves thousands of veterans across Connecticut. It also employs many veterans, correct, Eddie? And how might these cuts impact the VA's ability to serve the community?
Uh, yeah. My numbers may be off. I'm going off the top of my head, so my numbers may not be 100% accurate. But 22,000, I believe, workers at the VA are veterans themselves. If they end up being let go, that could damage. Obviously, that would be a huge financial impact for themselves and as well as their families. Um, and any and substantial any substantial cutbacks in the workforce. I'm sorry. Yes,
Do we know how big the workforce is in Connecticut for the VA, or at
that
least the
is
West Haven
something that
VA?
I've been trying to get answers from the VA. That's basically asking like what is the actual direct impacts that this would have, and I haven't really received a response on that level yet.
We understand that there's 19,000 or something like that, federal workers, at least in Connecticut,
Yeah.
beyond the VA, obviously. You had the opportunity to speak with a nurse from the West Haven VA. Her name is Renee Luno Shekvi. Here's what Renee had to say.
I can tell you what I didn't do last week. I didn't take a lunch a single day, and I didn't take a 15-minute break a single day because we're trying to do a lot with what little we have.
As you said, it sounds like workers at the VA are already spread very thin. Is that why people are so concerned about the work that has to be done there, and there's kind of these rallies happening?
Yeah, yeah, that's I would say that that's a large part of it. As I previously said, there's already a shortage of workers at the VA, and any substantial cutbacks to the workforce could worsen the already existing ramifications of those of short staffing at the VA, including wait times, um, just having enough medical workers to attend to patients. Yeah, it would have an impact.
How are local politicians responding to the news of the Trump administration's plans to cut more than 80,000 Department of Veteran Affairs workers nationwide?
Broadly, local politicians have broadly opposed these cuts. They've spoken similarly about how these cuts don't make a lot of sense or that they would harm veterans. So yeah, there's been a lot of backlash.
The nurse we heard from earlier, Renee Luno Shekvi, also shared with you how participating in the rally has impacted her personally. Let's take a listen to that.
I've lost friends over coming to this rally today, but this is not anti-anything. This is pro VA employees, pro veteran health care.
I just want to know, talk more about the ways the federal workforce cuts are being politicized. Because as you said, she's talking about losing friends, family, and she's just, it sounds like you saw the sign that she was holding, just trying to do her job and to also serve veterans.
Yeah, she made pains to state that she was not taking a political position by this because all she's doing is simply advocating for her job. But acquaintances and friends of hers haven't really seen eye to eye on her on that, and some of whom she didn't delve into like the political positions of her friends who stopped speaking to her. But one probably could surmise that they probably do support the cuts, or at least support the administration's actions on this by seeing how they could cut down on waste. But when she tries to have conversations with people about this, from her perspective, they just push away and they don't want to engage.
Sounds like what's happening a lot through America right now, a lot of political polarization. Any final thoughts, Eddie? Anything else you want to share on this topic specifically?
One thing that stood out to me was at the very end when I started packing away my things, and she told me that she just hated uh, just how difficult it was to have these types of conversations now, as opposed to just a decade ago. And she just wishes. She even told me that she wishes that that not that the politicization of this of everything in general just never happened.
Eddie works in our Fairfield office with Erica McIntosh. We appreciate the work that they do. Eddie, really quickly, what are you guys working on down there? Any stories coming out in the near future?
Heading down to Stanford within the hour over a press conference over earned income tax credit, I believe. I'm mixing that up, so yeah.
Yeah, this cat's working all the time. Thank you so much, Eddie. I appreciate it. I like to call him Everyday Eddie because he's always out there for us. We appreciate your work. We appreciate Erica's work. We want to make sure that we shout out Erica's work with Black Voices that she's done on ctpublic.org. You can go there and see the work that she's done. And, of course, the great work these guys do every day, Eddie and Erica. Breaking news and general assignment reporter for Connecticut Public. Good luck down there at Stanford, Eddie.
Thank you so much, Frankie. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, coming up, we're going to continue our conversation about the federal workforce cuts. Let us know what you think about DOJ's latest actions. Have you been impacted by cuts in the federal workforce? Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. We'll take your calls next. Look forward to hearing from you. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. The impact of federal workforce cuts are being felt far and wide. In November 2024, the federal government employed just over 3 million people. That's according to Bureau of Labor Statistics data. To give us an idea of how many people are impacted by President Trump's controversial initiative, I'm joined by Lisa Hagan, federal policy reporter for Connecticut Public Mirror and Connecticut Public. Good morning, Lisa. There you are.
Hey, morning, Frankie.
So happy to see you this morning. Also joined by Jory Heckman, reporter for the Federal News Network. Jory, great to have you on the show.
Hey, Frankie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you on. Folks want to join the conversation, 888-720-9677. We're looking to maybe talk to a federal worker or maybe somebody that's concerned about the cuts. Maybe you're even thinking that these cuts are going to help us in the economy, something like that. Give us a call. Let us know what your thoughts are. 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. We're going to begin with a basic question. Why is President Trump's administration, Lisa, and DOJ in particular, focusing on federal workers here?
There's been a Republican push for years to want to reduce the federal government and President Trump as well. So, I mean, that was something that he had tried to do and did a bit in his first term. He had employed a federal hiring freeze. We're seeing the same thing now. But, I think there was a lot of kinks they were trying to work out in the first term. He and, some of his allies were pretty new to federal government. Things got caught up in the courts. And so I think coming back this time around, they definitely had a plan. Obviously, it's been coming out at a pretty high speed pace right now. So yeah, this is something that he's talked about and people in his party have talked about for years. And so I think just again, the pace is kind of what is surprising, catching a lot of people off guard.
Yeah, it's like the Die Hard sequel. It's like Trump with a vengeance here. They're coming back and they're doing it a different way this time around. U.S. Congressman Joe Courtney says the issue of employment for federal workers is the biggest one on his plate right now. He says he's getting a lot of calls on it. Let's listen to the congressman. This is what he is saying since he's getting a lot of these calls since the inauguration happened.
There is no question that the number one issue that is really troubling many people is DOGE and the really extra legal efforts that are going forward in terms of just intruding on privacy data, interrupting operations of departments and agencies. And then what we're going to talk about today is just the, in my opinion, full-scale assault on federal employees.
I've been covering Courtney pretty closely for the last 10 years, and he doesn't always speak so directly about something like that. He's always careful about being inflammatory. He says that the party you support, or whether you voted for President Trump or not, also shouldn't impact the way you absorb news of the federal labor crisis. He says a lot of federal employees live in red states and red districts, some of them holding a higher concentration of federal workers than southeastern Connecticut, which is pretty big, where 3% of federal employee workforce resides. Who are some of these southeastern Connecticut federal workers? What jobs are we talking about, Lisa?
Yeah, a lot of it's at the submarine base in Groton. I think there's about 1,000 civilian employees. I mean, that's not including anyone who's on active duty. That's not anyone who has, any kind of federal contracts. And so, yeah, I mean, this is why his district has such a high concentration of civilian workers. And, I know we're going to talk about this more, but you and I were on a call with one of the veterans who lost their job. He resides actually where Courtney lives in Vernon, and he went to see Trump's joint address last week. And so, yeah, I mean, he doesn't work at the sub base; he worked at the IRS. But I mean, again, a lot of them are in southeastern Connecticut, and so I think that's why Congressman Courtney is talking so forcefully about this issue.
Yeah, big question that the reporters wanted to know on that call. Who did Gabe Delatry, who's who Lisa Hagan is talking about, vote for in the last election? I'm going to let it hang out there and let you all wait for that clip to come in a moment. First, I'm going to talk to Jory Heckman from the Federal News Networks. Thank you so much for coming on, Jory. Connecticut Congressman Joe Courtney explained that many federal workers live in red states and red districts. Would you talk to us about the impact of President Trump's federal workforce cuts are or will be on those areas in particular?
Sure. I think it's always worth pointing out that only about 15% of the federal workforce lives within the Washington, D.C. metro area. The remaining 85%, that's the rest of the country. In places like Texas, in places like Utah, that's a high concentration of IRS employees especially, but the federal workforce lives wherever the rest of the country lives.
When we think about like the swamp and draining the swamp, that's generally supposed to be D.C., right?
That's the idea from the administration. Is they say that this is a high concentration of federal employees within the greater capital area.
But as you're saying, it's spread out pretty much throughout the country and not just in D.C.
That's right. I mean, the vast majority of federal employees work beyond the Washington, D.C. metro area.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to point that out. Reps in states like Connecticut have not accepted these federal workforce cuts. As Lisa shared earlier, Courtney supports a bill to reinstate federal workers immediately. How are lawmakers responding, Lisa?
Exactly. We saw that bill you're referencing that Congressman Courtney supports. It's reinstating veterans who have lost their job. I know Senator Blumenthal just put out a bill, I think yesterday. I don't know if it's exactly companion legislation, but it's very similar. It would be reinstating veterans who lost their jobs, including back pay, and it would also include not just veterans, but I think military spouses and others who have lost their jobs. So, I mean, this is something that they're definitely taking very seriously in Congress. I'm still unclear of whether it has Republican support, and that's the important thing because any bill that needs to get through is going to need bipartisan support. Republicans control both chambers of Congress. Anything that wants to get brought up in the House and the Senate is going to need buy-in support from the leaders and from the Speaker of the House. And so I think, but I think there's been a lot of pressure specifically on the loss of jobs for veterans. So I think I think that's something that we're going to see play out a little bit more in Congress, and then maybe there will be some more bipartisan traction on that front.
Including one of Joe Courtney's constituents, as you mentioned earlier, who went to the State of the Union address, Gabe Delautry of Vernon, who was injured while serving his country as a United States Marine, recently fired from his job with the Internal Revenue Service less than a week before his probation period was set to end. And here's a clip.
Veterans serve both parties. Veterans serve our country. We serve the people. Federal workers too. They took an oath to the Constitution, just like somebody in the military did. So I'm here to try and help people get their jobs back and raise awareness about almost 6,000 veterans that lost their jobs. And hopefully I can get my job back. But if I don't get my job back and 5,999 other veterans get their jobs back, I did my job coming down here. So that's what I'm looking to do.
And here's us closing the loop from that tease earlier. Delautry voted for President Donald Trump last November. He felt that Trump showed a commitment to veterans during the presidential campaign.
I didn't hear anything about federal employees being let go. I was in support of the government being more efficient. I think everybody is, any party would like to see a more efficient government, but I didn't think people would be fired en masse like this.
Gabe and Courtney, as Lisa mentioned, sat together during the March 4th address to Congress. Can you respond to what you heard from Gabe Delautry on that call and in your resulting coverage?
Yeah, I think it underscores, again, I think the surprise that everyone's seeing in some of these cuts. I mean, a lot of people, and including, Gabe spoke to this, he still is supportive of cutting waste, fraud, abuse, what have you, in federal government. But that was not something that he expected. And this is obviously something that impacted him personally. Something he was talking about also on the call was that he was 5 days away from basically having permanent status. He was still in that probationary 1-year period. A lot of probationary workers have lost their jobs as part of these reductions in the federal workforce. So Gabe was part of that at the IRS. And so, yeah, I think he's just, he, based on what he had heard on the campaign trail and what he thought President Trump would do, I think he and others are pretty surprised at just the loss of jobs.
And that's why I'm so happy to have Jory on this call as well, because I want to follow up on that point in particular. Veterans Affairs employees kind of make up the largest share of the federal workforce, around 487,000 employees nationwide, something like that. We got that from the Office of Personnel Management. Historically, veteran voters have been more likely to support President Trump. Have you heard from veterans, Jory, who share Delautry's surprise over the president's cuts to the VA?
Yeah, over the course of the past few weeks, I've spoken to VA employees, current ones, who have told me that they voted for President Trump in the latest election and have expressed some remorse with that decision. People who applauded the first Trump administration's efforts to make it easier for the VA, for example, to fire employees who were accused of poor performance or misconduct. But more recently, what they've seen is that they are cutting the agency in all the wrong places, that they are really focused on headcount reductions in a way that they are concerned might turn around and impact the agency's ability to deliver health care to veterans, deliver benefits to veterans, and really walking back that promise they've made to this country's veterans, providing them the services they're eligible to receive.
Headcount reduction. That's a nice corporate term there. Is there public pushback against that? And is it more to the point, is the Trump administration walking back any of these recent rulings?
At this point, the VA has done much less of a workforce reduction than we'll see play out in the coming months. So far, they've eliminated about 2,400 VA employees. These are mostly probationary employees, people who were in the first year or two of their jobs and are just easier to let go of than people who are more tenured within the federal workforce. What we expect to see in the coming months is that the VA is prepared to fire as many as 80,000 employees nationwide. VA Secretary Doug Collins says that would equate to about a 15% reduction in the VA workforce overall. And They're still early days in terms of doing that analysis, looking at where they would cut, what departments, what offices, what programs. But that would be a significant reduction in the VA's headcount. And as you pointed out, it's the second largest agency in the federal workforce, second only to the Defense Department.
888-720-9677, the number to call if you'd like to speak with us today on The Wheelhouse, 888-720-9677. You could also email us, wheelhouse@ctpublic.org. But really, we do want to make sure we get your calls on today. We're talking about federal worker layoffs, but we're also talking about cuts that are happening at the government level. And here's Denise from Farmington who wants to share some worries that she has regarding all these cuts. How you doing today, Denise?
I'm fine. How are you doing? Thanks for taking my call.
I'm happy to have you on. Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I'm not currently affected by what's happening in the federal government, but I do have a lot of empathy for all the people that are losing their jobs. But one thing that I'm very concerned about is what they're doing in the Social Security division, and basically every day I wake up kind of sick to my stomach because I know they're in there and they're doing all this crazy stuff, which they're really not telling us what they're doing. But I'm concerned that they're going to be making a mistake or do something that will cause people like me, retirees, that rely on our Social Security checks to not get our payments. I mean, I live in a community of people 62 and older, and most people that live here rely on their Social Security every month. And like me, they're all concerned and worried that next month maybe our checks won't come.
Can I ask you a follow-up, Denise?
Sure.
Is this causing you to do anything like drastic, or like I don't know, seeking ways to supplement income in the concern that Social Security is not going to be there, or maybe you're advocating more? What's it causing you to do?
Well, I'm not looking for a job at this point. I mean, I'm 75 years old.
Gotcha.
And I don't really want to have to go to work. But I suppose if that was the only choice, because I really need my Social Security to survive. I mean, I have a small pension from where I worked, but it isn't enough to sustain me. I definitely need that check every month to pay my rent and pay my bills and just buy food and just live. I have done some things like calling my congressman, calling my senator. I've sent some emails. I have done some things like that. But other than that, I haven't done anything.
Sounds like you're doing a lot, Denise. It really does. So you should applaud yourself for that.
Yes, thank you. But I'm worrying. I'm worrying a lot. I mean, I feel like it's actually going to affect my health because I worry every single day about what's going to happen.
Denise, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear. We're thinking about you. We hope that you can find a way to cope with all of this, and hopefully you get the answers you need.
I hope so. Well, thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for coming on, Denise. I appreciate it. It's good to hear from Denise. I went a little long with her because I wanted to help some of our listeners understand what people are going through right now, because I've had conversations with family members, friends, neighbors that are telling me this exact thing. So are you guys hearing this as well, Jory and Lisa?
Yeah, I can take it first. There's definitely a lot of panic and confusion around Social Security, and I don't want to, speculate too much on what could happen, just because I think a lot of this is up in the air. But there, at least from a federal workforce perspective, there have been cuts at the Social Security Administration, and I think one of the biggest things we're starting to hear about is the consolidation or closing of regional and field offices. And that's something that I've tried to understand, because, it's, again, there's a reduction in it. I don't know exactly what that means for Connecticut. I've been trying to get answers on how many may have been closed, again, or consolidated in Connecticut. I've asked Congressman Larson, since he is really big on that issue of Social Security, and he sits in a lead capacity on a subcommittee in Congress on that issue. And so he hasn't quite gotten answers on that yet either. And so I think there's the fear that if there is, again, a reduction in field offices where people are that's probably the offices where people are mostly dealing with questions and concerns and calling into when they're concerned about Social Security. But beyond that, at least President Trump has said when they're talking about big spending cuts for the big bill that tax cuts are working on, they said that they're going to preserve Social Security. So as of right now, that's all I can say and report on that.
The way that Denise is talking about this and saying that they're kind of doing stuff behind our backs and not really being transparent. Normally, that's something that we might bat an eye to because it's different kind of language. But in a way, we're understanding that not even Congressman Larson, who spends so much time trying to understand what's happening with Social Security, doesn't have many answers. And there's not a lot of answers for people like Denise right now. And I'm sure that yesterday's information about Medicaid and plans for Medicaid over a long time are starting to get people concerned because we're talking about entitlement programs for people in the biggest areas of need. Jory, anything you want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I can confirm what's already been said about this, that the Social Security Administration is looking at reductions in office space. They're looking at reductions in the workforce. They're going through the same thing that a lot of other agencies are going through right now. They are doing this preliminary step where they're offering early retirements to employees. They are offering buyouts of up to $25,000 for people to consider leaving their jobs. This is different from what we saw previously with the OPM fork in the road email we saw previously. But what this all is leading up to is, and this is happening government wide, is what's called a reduction in force. These are massive layoffs where agencies kind of decide what they don't want to be in the business of doing anymore. This means elimination of having a reduction of fewer people doing the same tasks or eliminating certain offices and programs. We've seen this play out at some agencies already, and the expectation is we'll see this play out as well at Social Security. And we heard from the former SSA Commissioner, Martin O'Malley, raise real concerns about these cuts of this magnitude happening at SSA. He says it's really a matter of when, not if, payments will get missed.
Michael Missel, a guest of Senator Blumenthal at President Trump's address to Congress. Of course, lawmakers trying to represent their constituents, also trying to send messages to the president. Why did Senator Blumenthal ask him to attend, Lisa?
Same reasoning why Congressman Courtney brought Gabe Delatry, trying to put a spotlight on those who have lost their jobs and many of them, saying and claiming that they were illegally fired. And so Michael Missel was one of the 17 inspectors general that were fired, I think within days of Trump taking office. And so he and others have pushed back that they were illegally fired because Congress is supposed to get 30 days notice of an intention to fire IGs. And so, so he's actually from Bristol, and he was leading basically the VA IG's office. And so those are, he said he was kind of currently involved in thousands of investigations. IGs are all independent, and they're trying to hold their various and respective agencies that they oversee accountable. And so, yeah, he's currently tied up in a lawsuit. I think they're dealing this week with a hearing in terms of whether they can be reinstated. But as of right now, he and the other IGs are out of a job, and Trump has said that he is supposed to replace them. But I think that's all kind of in a little bit of uncertainty as the lawsuit prolongs.
When can we expect to see this case move forward in court?
He had told me that there was supposed to be a hearing on this week, I think yesterday. I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen an update currently on this, but he is working to get his job back, as well as at least several other of the IGs. So I think they're just kind of waiting to see. I think there was a original ruling that they weren't going to be immediately reinstated, but again, this is still playing out in courts.
And we'll be watching it and watching your reporter. Lisa's not going anywhere. She's staying with us, as is Jory Heckman, reporter for the Federal News Network. Reminder for our listeners, let us know what you think about the federal workforce cuts. We were so lucky to have Denise on earlier. She's talking about how she was impacted by federal cuts in general. I want to know how this is impacting you, your friends, your family. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677. We're going to be back after the break. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. This hour, we're discussing the impacts of President Trump's and the Department of Government Efficiency's initiative to cut the federal workforce. I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Lisa Hagen, federal policy reporter for the Connecticut Mirror and Connecticut Public. Good to see you this morning, Lisa.
Yeah, always great.
Also with us, Jory Heckman, reporter for the Federal News Network.
Thanks for having me, Frankie.
Good to see you this morning, Jory. Again, folks, join the conversation, 888-720-9677. Want to hear from you if you're impacted by these cuts. We also want to hear about you, as we've got a great panel here today. They're able to talk through some of the things happening at the federal government level. Obviously, it's not like Lisa and Jory have all the answers, not because their reporting's not great. It's just that as we're seeing, a lot of lawmakers, a lot of people that are actually making the cuts don't have the answers right now. But maybe they can help, as they did with Denise and Farmington earlier. Jory, I want to pivot to how workforce cuts impact the Internal Revenue Service, especially since we're in the midst of tax season right now. Workers have been ordered to return to in-person work. Is that correct?
That's correct. We saw that Monday was the big deadline for most employees to come back to the office if they weren't already. And what I've heard from IRS employees this week is it's been tough trying to find out whether there's enough space for everyone to go to the office. You know, these are big hubs like Ogden, Utah, Austin, Texas, folks, of course, here in the Washington, D.C. area. But what I've heard as a reoccurring theme is that overall there's more people than desks. They've had to get creative. There have been people who are working out of agency cafeterias. They've been working in conference rooms. One thing they did note here is that call center representatives have been exempt from those return to office orders, because you can imagine the frustration of trying to be on the phone with a taxpayer, trying to work through sensitive details of their situation, and you hear a call bleed through from someone standing right next to them, in the same room. So that's one concern that they did address. But overall, the IRS does concede that office space is an issue here. They've tried to get creative with where to put everyone, but it's been an issue this week so far.
You hearing anything about how confusion surrounding these cuts may impede the IRS's ability to do their work this tax season? And I guess what listeners would really want to know is, should I expect my refund on time or not?
Well, the IRS workforce has jumped through a lot of hoops in the past. They've always found a way to do more with less. They up until recently were dealing with kind of a decade of steady budget declines, workforce declines, and always delivered the tax filing season on time. And this is a concern that folks do have. IRS employees, unions that represent them. It's worth pointing out that the OPM fork in the road email, the deferred resignations that I referred to earlier, people who are considered essential for the filing season, they were exempt from that. They couldn't take that offer. We have seen, however, the IRS continue to lay off people. We saw that they did firings of about 6,500, maybe more at this point, employees across the IRS. And so there are concerns that these are people that do play a supporting role to the mission of the IRS, making sure that people get their tax questions answered, that they are getting their refund checks on time. So a lot going on here, but at this point, the agency at least is mindful that they are not trying to make cuts that would impact the filing season directly.
Many people do not enjoy filing their taxes, but it sounds like IRS workers are going through a lot right now. You're saying, Jory, that they've had a decade of workforce declines, but they're still working through it. It sounds like they're having to pump through it. So give your IRS worker friend a hug nowadays, because it sounds like they need it. Lisa, what I'm hearing is, especially from Jory here, is understaffing, unemployment, economic turmoil. What are the vibes like in DC right now? Are people worried?
The vibes are
How's the aura?
pretty. Yeah, it's pretty bleak in the sense that I think there's just a lot of division. I mean, we've heard that for years and years now, and I feel like it kind of hit a peak at the joint address where President Trump. It was not a State of the Union because they're not State of the Unions when they first come into office, but his first time addressing Congress since taking office, and I have covered many of them. I have sat in the room and watched over the years as there's just not a lot of cohesiveness in Congress, and it felt especially so this time around. You could just kind of feel the tension from the outset, and typically there's always pleasantries. When we have these types of speeches and everyone's coming together, or, again, not even just in the legislative branch, but just across the entire government. And there's just hundreds of people packed into a room. You could feel the tension from the start, and there were not many pleasantries. And I think back to when I think it was back in 2009 when there was a Republican member that yelled "You lie" to President Obama, and that was a huge scandal at the time. And having outbursts during State of the Unions were very far and few between, and that is just not the case now. There's just outbursts immediately, a lot of yelling, both sides clapping, and just it's very reactionary now. So that's kind of the vibe right now.
I hate to put you on the spot, but when that happened in 2009, was that person censured? Or did they face?
I was not covering it at the time. Yeah. I do not remember if he was censured.
Well, let's talk about it in this way. Yeah, sorry, because we have in a blue state like Connecticut, tensions rising. We have a situation where somebody was speaking out during the State of the Union, but folks have voted to censure Representative Al Green, including 10 Democrats, I understand it, or something like that, who joined every Republican in the vote. One of them, Jim Himes from Connecticut.
Yeah, I have not been able to connect with him since he voted to censure Al Green. But yeah, I mean, they got some Democrats on board with that vote. I was in the room while that was happening. It was pretty much from the jump that happened. It did go on for a few minutes. Democrats hadn't really tried to stop him in the moment. They just kind of let him do his thing and let it play out until that he was removed from the chamber. And so, yeah, but I mean, again, I think that, we saw Congressman Himes and a few others get on board and join Republicans and say that was an out of order moment. But again, the fact that most Democrats are backing up Al Green, I think it just shows you the tensions that are on display right now in DC.
So we had that Jim Himes voting to censure there. he was removed. I think this was on March 4th or something like that. But Himes said he wanted to, in the past, vote. It was Joe Wilson, who was a congressman. He yelled, "You lie," at President Obama's State of the Union address. And I think he voted to censure Joe Wilson back then. So he wanted to be consistent, I guess, and vote for Al Green this time around and him being censured. Want to go back to a comment we've gotten, at least from some of our listeners. Thank you so much to the folks that are listening today, including Christine from Reading. Want us to focus on how workforce cuts are happening and the repercussions this will bring the country, and based on how they're doing it, using a sledgehammer, all these layers of government are being decimated. Jory, can you respond to what Christine said there? The how behind what they're doing seems intense. Sledgehammer was a word she used.
Yeah, it really does speak to the magnitude of what we're seeing. Workforce cuts are not, one party or another, what an administration does. We've seen workforce cuts under, Democratic administrations. Yeah, I think the closest parallel a lot of people have drawn was under the Clinton administration. They successfully cut the workforce substantially. They really did try to do a lot of the same mechanisms of offering incentives, financial incentives for federal employees to leave. They looked at downsizing agencies. But what I think one concern has been is just so much happening so quickly, to this point about being done with an axe versus a scalpel. Going back to this point I made earlier about reductions in force, typically to make sure that you're minding your P's and Q's legally, that's a process that takes about a year, maybe longer, to make sure that you're being mindful of who you're letting go, whether the remaining workforce can continue to pick up the slack, so to speak, making sure that you're not letting go of people who are veterans, which are a concern. There's veterans preference in the federal workforce. You basically get extra consideration in the hiring process if you are a veteran who served our country. Things like that, and that's just an accelerated timeline. A substantially accelerated timeline. What we're seeing play out now is that they are doing they're doing these workforce cuts fast and furious. They are letting go of tens of thousands of federal employees across the federal workforce now, and the expectation is that that's only going to continue going forward.
Is this federal worker inefficiency that DOGE has been working on and focused itself on a big problem down in DC? Is this something that that is so pervasive that it needs to be addressed?
I think you've heard bipartisan voices here that any organization, any government agency can always be more efficient. You have people like the inspectors general at agencies, people like the former IG at the VA, Michael Missel, people who their full-time job is to take a deep dive at agency programs, making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to and identifying fraud, waste, and abuse. That's always going to be part of the business of government, is looking at what's not working well and improving that. There is some concern, though, that what's being done is not necessarily the remedy. That if you are cutting and only later realizing the repercussions of what you're cutting, who you're cutting, that can have an adverse impact on what you're trying to accomplish in the first place.
Yeah, because it sounds like they're using the axe rather than the scalpel, and that is always controversial. Malachi from Guilford pointed out that we should really be saying earned benefits rather than entitlements. Thank you for that, Malachi. That's a great note. Mostly because of folks are always looking at these programs, Social Security, Medicaid, things like that, as entitlement programs, when really we're just trying to help people out and trying to have the state as well as the federal government do that. Lisa, let's get some final thoughts. By the way, great participation from callers today. Thank you so much. 888-720-9677 was the number. Thank you so much for calling. Lisa, what stories are you going to be following the next few weeks as more cuts unfold?
Yeah, well, exactly kind of on this. I mean, we're seeing right now the potential for 50% of the education department workforce be put on leave or laid off. That's happening kind of, well, there was notice of it kind of as we speak, and that could play out, I think, in the next few weeks. And so that's something that I'm focusing on, and what that will mean for education and the federal funding that Connecticut gets on this front. So that's
Anything,
definitely
Jory,
a
you
big
could share
focus.
that you're working with on the Federal News Network side?
Well, similarly, the education department cuts, we saw that play out last night, that they started to let people go there. And, there's an expectation that there'll be an executive order soon, quote unquote, eliminating the department. That's something you can't necessarily do without buy-in from Congress. There are statutory things in there that are legally required to be done by a government agency. Also, just looking at the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs, they've canceled hundreds of contracts recently in the name of government efficiency. We don't quite have visibility into what some of those contracts are, but we're starting to learn more and more about that.
That's Jory Heckman, reporter for the Federal News Network. Jory, thanks so much for coming on this hour.
Thanks for having me.
And, of course, good friend Lisa Hagan, federal policy reporter for Connecticut Mirror and Connecticut Public. So good to see you, Lisa.
Good to see you as well, Frankie. Thank you.
Outstanding conversation with Lisa and Jory. Thank you to Eddie Martinez. And today's show produced by Chloe Wynn. Great job, Chloe. Edited by Robin Doyen-Aiken. Technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download The Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.